Hello and welcome to this demo of building paths in Planet Coaster. Today we're going to be looking at building paths using the grid system. Before we get started, make sure you click to subscribe on our channel. We have a lot of great theme park videos and Planet Coaster videos and everything. So I got this idea based off of my last coaster, or my last park, with the paths. I shared some pictures and Planet Coaster was kind enough to retweet them, and a lot of people asking how I did the paths the way I did. So first thing I always do is an entrance, and then when you are actually doing the grid, you need to do the first piece, as you can see here, without the grid, and then you just click select grid and you basically map out the very start of your grid. Now I actually use this grid now, the same grid, throughout my entire park. I don't change the size of it. I don't go from the 9 to 10 feet here to the 30 feet because at some point you'll have a gap in your grid. So I actually use this size grid for the entire thing. So you can see here I have a nice little entrance building with a couple little shops and my grid. So I'm just going to go ahead and extend my grid out a little bit here and start building kind of my entry plaza. And I'm just going to go ahead and map out a little bit of an entry here. And as you can see now, I've got a perfect square with my entry, my 3 entries there. So usually I would start making things, on my own, but for this demonstration I'm going to go ahead and just use a couple of things that I found in the workshop. Some really cool stuff. One of the other things I will point out is you want to make sure that you have the angle snap on. It does help when you are building paths using the grid. So I'm just going to go ahead and place this item here, and you can see the paths are already generated. I always use the advanced move, so you can see I can move this around a little bit and see where I want to actually put my path, and in the middle. So in this case here, because you have 3 different shops at different levels, so you can't really get a grid on that entire level like that. See, so you kind of, in order to get it to look right on the grid, I'm just going to go ahead and place it outside of my paths there, and I'm going to build a couple of paths for the other couple of stores here like this. So I'm just going to build little side paths there. You can see there I've done that, and sometimes you have to play around with it a little bit. It's not always gonna work. And the other thing that you also want to make sure that you do, as you can see I didn't do it here, sometimes the shops they are all one piece, and other times you have to basically select all of it using the select all tool. So just keep that in mind when you're using workshop items. Sometimes the shops are not connected to the building. So in this case here, I'll have to use the multi-selection tool and then move it that way. So here I've now got my 3 shops. I can now, with the advanced move it around to fit the grid where I want it, and then move it as close as I want and to the left and right so it doesn't interfere with my shop. So this is a pretty standard shop there. Some of the shops are a little bit more advanced, obviously, but now I can go ahead and build the rest of my grid around my shop. So as those of us who visit theme parks know, unlike the path system that is in Planet Coaster, in theme parks, paths are kind of the default setup, right? So you don't just have paths going every which way. You have, walkways and then everything kind of within that walkway. So that's kind of the idea here of using the grid system, or in order to do your paths here in Planet Coaster. So next I'm just going to go ahead and put just a real basic ride. I'm going to put a Ferris wheel here. This is one of the easier attractions to do because it's square. There's no issues with the grid. When you get into the round attractions, it's a little bit different, so we'll get to that. So I'm just going to go ahead and again flip this around, And again, I'm gonna put it a little bit away from my path right now because I want to set up the entrance and the exit just so I can make sure that everything matches. So I'm going to put my entrance over here, my exit there, and then now I'll go ahead and advance move my Ferris wheel here to fit the path where I want it. Right, so now I've got my exit, it's already attached to my path. And then again, I could just move it to where I want, get it as close to that path as I want it. Okay, and then I'll make sure that it's centered because I like it that way. Then I'll go ahead and use my path, and I'll go ahead and create my queue. And again, just like with the regular path, you need to do the first one without the grid and then go ahead and select the grid afterwards. By using the same size grid for both your queue and your paths, it just makes everything work a little easier when you're doing all that. So now we'll go ahead and connect our path here, and sometimes you have to play around with a little bit, either figure out if you want to have the queue go all the way to the end, or so you have to just kind of figure it out. Now it's not always going to match up perfectly, as you can see here. It's not going to always be a straight line, and it's just something that you're going to have to deal with. It bothered me for a while. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get everything to look perfectly square all the time, and it's just not going to work. With a lot of things. So just keep that in mind as you're going through, especially again when you get into building round attractions. The paths, try to get straight queue lines in your round attractions. It's never going to work. So don't even try. But like I said, sometimes you just got to play around with a little bit, move some stuff around, delete some paths, and kind of see where you want to do it. In this case here, I have to just shorten the queue line just a little bit, just to make sure that it's matches up where I want it. And again, I would go ahead and fill in a normal park. I would go ahead and fill in the rest of that with scenery and trees and things like that. But again, for this demonstration, we're just looking at paths. So I'm going to go ahead and expand my paths out just a little bit from here. And first, I'm going to go ahead and just, again, I'm going to use something from the workshop. I'm going to go ahead and just build a coaster. Again, typically I would build my own coasters, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I will go ahead and just use one from the workshop. And typically, even if I'm using a workshop scenery, so like this, typically I would use the queue building and the trees and the scenery. I would still build my own coaster. That's just kind of how I am. But I have no problem actually using the workshop. I know a lot of people don't like using the workshop. I actually have no problem with that. I always will use that as my template, and then I will modify it to fit what my theme is. So in my last park, the entry building that I just put out there, I actually converted that into a coaster station for one of my coasters. So I'll sometimes not even use it for the same purpose. So again, here in this case here, I'm just going to find something that has a connected path to make sure that everything is squared up. So you can see I have my height right, I have everything that I want, and I'm going to go ahead and push this back now so I can see that everything it matches. And then now I can go ahead and push this back a little bit and get my queue and my exit for my coaster to give me enough space here to expand my park out. So again, I'm putting everything close to my existing path, and then I will go ahead and back it up like so. And now I'll go ahead and do my queue for my coaster before I do my my path here. I'll go ahead and also, sometimes you might get this where it's kind of pulling out a different grid. So you kind of have to, again, sometimes you have to kind of play around with it. Again, that's the way the game is built. So sometimes you have to kind of delete things and rebuild them just because of the way that the paths are set up. Or you've just clicked on the wrong spot like I just did, and we're starting the grid from the wrong spot. So now you can see I can actually build my grid. And a lot of times what will happen too is you're connected to a queue line like I just was. You have to kind of delete that a little bit and start your grid over. And again, and it happens, but if you want everything to kind of be in symmetry, you've got to play around with it a little bit. And I don't think I'm an expert at this, but I have managed to adapt it for, you know, my needs and what I want to do. So here I'll go ahead and connect my little shop to my path there. And again, you can see it's a little off. So what I'm going to do in this case here, again, I just look for one point of contact to where I want it. I'll just go ahead and multi-select everything. And I'll just move everything over. I always use the global snapping as well, because I want my path to be kind of right in the middle of that path there. So again, before I do too much work on this, I'm going to just make sure that everything is right where I want it before I start with the rest of my paths in my queue and anything else. So there you go. So now I've got it exactly where I want. I check it around, and now I'll go ahead and start on the rest of my coaster here. So this is where I would, at some point when I'm building my own parks, where I would start building my own coaster. Now that I've got the queue line and the scenery kind of put in its place. So the other thing I will say, I do like to not use the angle snap, but I like to turn off the curved slopes, especially when you're doing stairs. Again, that's just me. But if you want to use those, then by all means go for it. So again, I'll just do my stairs down, and then once I'm on the ground, that's when you want to select the grid there. So now I'll go ahead and do my queue line. And again, typically I would build this queue line, and then I would build some kind of queue building around it. For this video, I'm not going to go ahead and do that. And again, for some reason, you just can never get that last turn to be square. Again, that's just something with the game. You know, you can spend hours trying to do it, and it's just not going to work. So I would suggest just living with it and dealing with it. So again, you can see the angle's a little bit different than my normal path, so you're going to get a little bit of an angle there, which again, not that big of a deal. And then you have your entrance. So now we have our entrance and exit. Now, how you want to actually do the edges of your queue is up to you. I like to use the railing. I've seen a lot of people use no railing, and then they'll just put in their own railing. I'm actually okay with the railing that the park supplies, the park paths have, just because I think it's fine. But that's totally up to you. I do, you know, put a little, you know, scenery or rocks or waterfall. So again, I'm just going to use something from the workshop here, a nice little waterfall to kind of hide the corner of my path there. You could also put in, you know, a shop here. You know, maybe even a small flat ride, depending on what you want to do. But again, I'll just go ahead and put a couple little scenery things here. And again, even though you're using a workshop item, you can always move things around if you need to. So for example, you know, if the tree's in the middle of the path, you can always just move that to a different spot. So you can see, I don't want to block my exit, so I'll just, you know, move that one spot, that one thing, and I'll just move it outside of my line. And if I felt the need to move any of those rocks or anything, I would do that too. But in this case here, I'm just going to go ahead and leave it. And I always, you know, tend to take a look and make sure that everything looks good from all angles. Maybe build a little pond here to connect these two water features. So there you go. So now you've got your entrance, you've got your little coaster, Ferris wheel, shops that do not match at all, I know, and then, you know, some scenery pieces. So you can see how you're going to start to build a little bit of your park there. So we'll go ahead and connect the path all the way around this coaster here. And you can make the path go as close to your scenery as you want. It's up to you. I tend to try to get as close to the scenery as possible. Just be aware that your guests will walk through scenery if it is in the path. So if there's a rock or a fountain, and also be careful of coaster supports and things like that too if you want them to be there. If you put a path under a coaster support, it will go away. Some rides their supports will stay. So like a sky ride will stay on a path, but for coaster support it will not. But again, if you have any kind of rocks or trees or fountains in the path, your guests will walk through them. That's just part of the game. So just keep that in mind as you're building that. If you don't want your guests to walk through walls. So again, using a smaller grid size is a little more time consuming, but I think that it actually gives you a little bit more flexibility in getting things closer to attractions and scenery pieces than the larger ones. But that's completely up to you. But again, you can't really, if you're using it from the beginning of your park, at some point if you go from the 13 to the 30, so for example, you will have a gap in your grid at some point, and then if you go back to the smaller grid, you'll have another gap. So I've actually found by keeping it the same grid size throughout, it takes a little bit longer to make your paths. But in the long run, it will look better in your park because you don't have gaps in your grid. So you don't have to put, rocks or plants or anything in the way. You can just kind of use the same thing. And also by using the smaller ones, it allows you to kind of do different patterns and things like that. So again, around this scenery here, I can kind of do the same kind of pattern on both sides, just so it looks better. And then again, typically back there in that little corner, I might put in like a little snack stand or something just to do that. And then when you're doing the grid, once you start to see where the path is not matching, that means that your terrain is a different level. So typically what I'll do is, once I start seeing that, I'll kind of flatten the terrain a little bit just to make sure that the grid will fit. So as you can see here, I'm flattening the terrain. Now I can go back and finish my grid. So again, typically I would just in that little corner there, just a little popcorn stand or something, just a little fun thing. But again, since this is about paths, I'll leave that alone. At some point I might make this into a full park. So now you can see now I've got a full circle around my entire coaster there that connects back to my entry plaza. Alright, so let's build a couple more little shops here just so you can kind of see how things work out when you're creating your park. And again, I'll just use something from the workshop here. Put a little ATM here in the corner so you can see you've got a little space there. So again, you might have to go back and delete a couple things if you wanted to fit it in a tight spot, which again is fine, not that big of a deal. So again, I'll just rotate this to where I want it. So you can either make it on the side, or in this case here, I'll go ahead and just do it right in the corner there. Make a little corner piece for my ATM. I can move some scenery around. I don't want to block my crocodile there, so I'll move this tree out of the way. So I can either just do an advanced move and just move it around, or just move it somewhere else. But in this case here, I'll just advanced move it, keep the tree there. So you're just gonna, basically start filling out your park with different things, and just create your path as you go. And that's what I've really found to be the best way to do it. So I would suggest if you're starting this, I would start with some basic shops and attractions, and then you can move into until you kind of figure out how you would like to do it, and then kind of move forward. Kind of measured where I want my buildings, and I'll go ahead and build my path out a little bit for each side. So I've got one shop in the middle and two on the sides. So I'll kind of build my path out to match that, and then go in and select all, and then move my building around where I want it. And as you can see, it's going to try to start connecting a little bit. So just kind of move things around as much as you can until you get it where you want it. And then a lot of times what you'll have to do as well is you'll see what I end up having to do here is once I've got it set, and the system will automatically connect things to shops, as you can see here. A lot of times it'll still not be what I want, so I'll go back and delete some stuff and then just recreate the grid after the shops have been placed. So I kind of use the paths as a guide for the shops, and then once I've got everything set, I'll go back and recreate my grid just so I can get everything again right where I want it. So now everything is right there. It fits perfectly, and I'm sure there's some easier ways to do this, but this is kind of what works best for me. I'm not as experienced in the game as some other people. And the other thing that I like to do as well is whenever I'm building a park, I like to build out some areas, some backstage areas for staff. So again, as I mentioned, even when I'm using workshop items, I will always modify them to fit my particular needs, whether it's a coaster, whether it's a shop. I'll always kind of modify it to some extent. So here I'm just going to go ahead and edit this building, take out one of the wall pieces here, and put in a staff center. Move that bush out of the way. So again, by keeping it that close to the path there, again, I can put it right where I want it and connect my path right to it. And again, now that I've got my staff building there, I can move my path, create my path as close to the building as I want. And again, it's up to you if you want to use the paths with the railing or without the railing, completely up to you. Go ahead and copy this wall here and move it in front of my staff building. And again, typically if I'm spending a lot of time just building a park, I will, put tables and chairs and umbrellas outside of a staff building just to make it look more of a like behind the scenes area, and a little sign there and a rope, it says staff only or something like that. Trying to kind of do that, and I'll kind of make the backstage areas kind of bland on purpose, so I'll just use the black. And then just the basic lights and things like that. Just, so it's pretty evident that it's off limits to normal people. So the last thing I'm going to do for this demo is build a round attraction so you can kind of see how different the paths are for these types of attractions. I'm going to move the exit a little bit closer to my building that's there and my paths, and then here. Now for the queue lines for round attractions, I do turn off the angle snap because I kind of like to just hug them to the attraction here. It just makes it look a little bit better. You can do grid queue lines here, but I've actually found that they just don't look right with these round attractions. They just look weird, they look out of place, so I tend to just stick with the regular round queue lines here. So I'll just go ahead and build a queue line, And then now again, I've got to move around some of my stuff. So this tree, I'll move out of the way. Just put in that little spot there. Typically, I would start building attractions around this backstage area just so that people can't really see it, right? You don't want people just staring at your backstage area. So here I'll go ahead and connect my path. And you can make a couple, entrances to your backstage area, but again, I only usually do one. And then there I'd put some trees or something like that just to kind of block it off there. So just like before, I'll try to get as close to the other path, the queue line, as possible. But that's completely up to you. Also depends on the amount of scenery that you want to put around your rides too. So always leave some space for scenery if you can. You can always fill in the path later. Typically what I would do is I would just kind of copy one of the rocks that are here and just kind of move it around and duplicate it and put it around my path there to block my ride. And this is the kind of the quick and easy, I don't know if I'd really call it cheating, but it's the quick and easy way to hide your queue line. And typically I would put more things there than just rocks, I'd put water and stuff like that. You can kind of see what I'm getting at here. So that's pretty much about it. So again, I found it helpful to start at the beginning and just use the same pattern throughout the entire park there. So you can see there I've got a couple of rides, I've got coaster, and I've got some shops. And I'll just keep, as I'm moving out, I'll keep expanding my path using the same grid that I used from that very first part, and just start expanding my park out. Hope you enjoyed this video. Again, make sure you subscribe.